I never thought I'd be sitting in a courtroom at 65 years old, watching my only son's marriage crumble before my eyes. But there I was, gripping the wooden bench until my knuckles turned white, as Caroline, my daughter-in-law of 15 years, pointed her manicured finger at me from across the room. "It was always her," she spat, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Your mother ruined our lives, David. She never gave us a chance." I felt the eyes of everyone in that Boston courtroom turn to me, the supposedly meddling mother-in-law, the villain of their story. At that moment I wished I could disappear into the polished floor beneath my sensible shoes. But I sat there back straight, just as my late husband Richard would have expected me to do. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I've lived in the same colonial-style home in Cambridge for 40 years. I taught high school English for 3 decades before retiring 5 years ago. I garden. I volunteer at the local library. I bake cookies for my grandson, Tyler, and apparently, according to Caroline, I destroyed her marriage to my son. The truth couldn't have been further from her accusations. The rain battered against the courthouse windows as I drove home alone that afternoon. My wipers struggled against the downpour. Much like my mind fought against the flood of memories from the last 15 years. Where had things gone so wrong? When had I become the enemy? I pulled into my driveway, the same one where David had learned to ride his bike, where he'd washed his first car, where he'd proposed to Caroline on a perfect spring day while I watched from the kitchen window, wiping away happy tears. Now those memories felt tainted. Inside, I placed my purse on the entryway table and noticed the framed photo of all of us at Tyler's 10th birthday last year. We were all smiling, David with his arm around Caroline's waist, Tyler blowing out candles and me standing slightly to the side. We looked happy. Were we ever really? The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. "Mom?" David's voice cracked on the other end. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, sinking into my armchair. "I'm sorry about today, about what Caroline said. You know it isn't true." I closed my eyes. Do I know that? "David, because lately I don't know what to believe anymore. Can I come over? There are some things we need to discuss." An hour later, David sat across from me at my kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of the same chamomile tea I'd given him whenever he was upset as a child. At 42, the lines around his eyes had deepened, and flecks of gray peppered his dark hair he'd inherited from Richard. "I found something, Mom," he said, his voice low. "Something that changes everything." He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a bank statement. Caroline's private account, one I hadn't known existed, and the transactions told a story that made my stomach turn. Regular transfers to someone named Marcus Delgado, large withdrawals near casinos. Money moved from what I recognized as Tyler's college fund. "Who is Marcus?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Her personal trainer," David said, his voice hollow. "Though apparently they've been training him more than just fitness for the last 3 years. The affair wasn't even what hurt him the most. It was the money. Nearly $190,000 drained from their accounts over the past 2 years. Money they'd saved together. Money meant for their son's future. "How did you find this?" I asked. "Tyler, actually." A sad smile crossed David's face. "He's 17 now, you know. Not much gets past him. He noticed Mom was always texting someone when you weren't around, always deleting messages. He got suspicious when she started making excuses about why they couldn't visit colleges this spring. Said the money wasn't there yet." I reached across the table and squeezed my son's hand. "I'm so sorry, David." "Don't be," he said firmly. "It's time we both stopped apologizing for things we didn't do." The following weeks unfolded like chapters in one of those suspense novels I'd read to my English students. David hired a private investigator who documented Caroline's affair in clinical detail. Financial forensics revealed even more: cash withdrawn from Tyler's savings account that Richard and I had established for him when he was born. Credit cards opened in David's name without his knowledge. And through it all, Caroline maintained that I was the problem, that my constant interference had driven her to seek comfort elsewhere, that my disapproving looks had made her feel inadequate, that my perfect mother-son relationship had left no room for her in David's life. She's trying to create a villain. "Mom," David told me one evening as we sat on my back porch. The spring flowers were beginning to bloom in the garden Richard had helped me plant decades ago. "She needs someone to blame because she can't face what she's done." "But why me?" I whispered. "What did I ever do except love both of you?" David sighed, looking out at the garden. "You remember that weekend 5 years ago, when Dad was in the hospital for the last time?" I nodded. How could I forget? Richard, my husband of 38 years, had been dying of pancreatic cancer. Those final days had been a blur of hospital corridors, hushed conversations with doctors, and the steady beep of machines. "Caroline wanted to go to her college reunion that weekend," David continued. "I told her I couldn't leave you and Dad alone, that Tyler and I needed to be there." He paused. "She never forgave me for that choice. Never forgave you for coming first." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "So this started 5 years ago? This resentment?" David nodded. "I think that's when she started seeing our marriage differently, started keeping score, started looking elsewhere." The court date for their next hearing arrived on a beautiful May morning. I had offered to stay home with Tyler, but he insisted on coming. "I need to be there, Grandma," he'd said, looking so much like his father at that moment that it made my heart ache. This time, I wasn't just an observer. David's lawyer had called me as a witness to establish a pattern of behavior. As I took the stand, I caught Caroline's eye. There was pure hatred there, directed at me with such force that I almost flinched. "Mrs. Sullivan," the lawyer began, "could you tell the court about your grandson's college fund?" I took a deep breath. When Tyler was born, my late husband and I established a savings account for him. We contributed to it monthly, even after Richard passed away. It was meant to give Tyler options for his future. And what happened to that account? Approximately $42,000 was withdrawn over the past 18 months. I was informed it had been transferred to a family emergency fund. I later discovered no such fund existed. Caroline shifted in her seat, whispering urgently to her lawyer. "And who had access to this account, Mrs. Sullivan?" "Initially only myself as the trustee. When Tyler turned 15, I added both David and Caroline as co-trustees, so they could manage it if anything happened to me." The questioning continued, methodical and devastating. Bank records, text messages, hotel receipts. The paper trail of betrayal laid bare in the sterile courtroom. When it was Caroline's lawyer's turn to cross-examine me, he went straight for what he believed was my vulnerability. "Mrs. Sullivan, isn't it true that you've always been overly involved in your son's marriage? That you've never approved of my client?" I looked at Caroline, then at David, and finally at Tyler, who sat with straight-backed dignity beyond his 17 years. "I welcomed Caroline into our family with open arms," I said quietly. "I gave them my husband's grandmother's ring for their engagement. I helped them with the down payment on their first home. I babysit Tyler whenever they needed time alone. I never commented when they missed Richard's funeral reception because Caroline had a headache. I kept silent when she refused to let Tyler spend Christmas with me the year after Richard died because they had other plans. So no. Counselor, I don't believe I've been overly involved. If anything, I've been too accommodating in my desire to be the mother-in-law I wish I'd had." A hush fell over the courtroom. Caroline's lawyer seemed momentarily stunned, then recovered. But you've made my client feel unwelcome, haven't you? Made her feel like an outsider. I met Caroline's gaze directly. I can't control how someone else feels. I can only control my own actions, and my actions have always been guided by love for my son, my grandson, and yes, even for Caroline. The proceedings continued with clinical precision. The judge reviewed the financial evidence, the documentation of infidelity, the impact on Tyler. Caroline's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel with each new piece of evidence. When we broke for lunch, I found Tyler sitting alone in the hallway, his lanky frame hunched over his phone. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" I asked. Sitting beside him, he looked up, his eyes so like his father's, rimmed with red. "Did you know, Grandma, about Mom and everything?" I shook my head. "No, Tyler. I had no idea." He nodded slowly. "Me neither. Not until I saw the texts." He swallowed hard. "She told me you were the reason they fought all the time. That you never liked her. That you tried to control Dad." I felt a sharp pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my age. "And you believed her?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "when I was younger. But then..." He trailed off, looking down at his hands. "Then I started noticing things. Money stuff. How she'd get weird about visiting colleges even though you told me my fund was doing great. How she'd get all these packages but hide them from Dad. How she'd say she was working late, but her location on Find My Friends was at some apartment building." I put my arm around his shoulders, surprised when he didn't pull away as he might have in earlier teenage years. "I'm the one who showed Dad the bank statements," he continued. "I found them on her laptop when she asked me to fix something. She wasn't even careful about hiding it, like she didn't think anyone would ever check." "That must have been very difficult for you," I said softly. "You know what's weird? Grandma, I'm not even that sad. I'm just angry. Really angry." He looked up at me. "She lied about you. All this time." When court resumed, the final testimonies were given. The financial examiner detailed the extent of Caroline's misappropriation of funds. The private investigator provided evidence of the affair. And finally, to everyone's surprise, Tyler asked to speak. At 17, he wasn't a child anymore, and the judge allowed it. He stood tall, his voice wavering only slightly as he described discovering his mother's deception. How she had tried to turn him against me. How she had explained away the missing college fund by blaming investment mistakes and your grandmother's poor financial advice. Caroline's face crumpled as her son spoke. For the first time, I felt a flicker of pity for her. Whatever her flaws, whatever her crimes against our family, she was losing something precious today, her son's trust and respect. The judge's ruling came 2 weeks later. The divorce was granted. David received primary custody of Tyler. Caroline was ordered to repay the misappropriated funds and received a significantly reduced settlement due to her financial misconduct. Outside the courthouse, as summer heat shimmered off the pavement, Caroline approached me while David spoke with his lawyer. "Are you happy now?" she asked, her voice low and bitter. "You've won. You've turned them both against me." I looked at this woman who had been part of my family for 15 years, who had given me my precious grandson, who had brought both joy and pain into our lives. "This was never a competition, Caroline," I said quietly. "There were no winners today." "Easy for you to say," she scoffed. "Perfect Margaret, the sainted mother and grandmother who never does anything wrong." I shook my head. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, but lying to my family wasn't one of them. I paused. "I hope someday you can rebuild your relationship with Tyler. He deserves a mother who puts his needs before her own." She looked away, tears forming in her eyes. "He'll never forgive me." "You'd be surprised at the capacity of children to forgive," I said. "But it takes honesty, real honesty." That night, David and Tyler came for dinner at my house. We ate in the dining room where so many family meals had been shared over the decades. The empty chair where Richard once sat seemed to watch over us. "So what happens now?" I asked, as I served the apple pie that had always been David's favorite. David looked at Tyler, then back at me. "We're thinking of moving, actually. The house has too many memories." "Moving where?" I felt a flutter of anxiety. After everything, would I lose them too? "We were thinking here, actually," David said hesitantly. "If you're open to it. The Hendersons next door are selling. Tyler and I looked at it yesterday." "You'd be right next door," I said, stunned. Tyler grinned for the first time in months. "I could come over for cookies whenever I want." "And you'd have your privacy," David added quickly. "We wouldn't intrude, but we'd be close enough if any of us needed anything." Tears welled in my eyes. I'd like that very much. Later, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the summer darkness, David put his hand over mine. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, Mom. All these years, she made you the villain in our story, and I let her." I squeezed his hand. "We believe what we need to believe sometimes, especially when the truth is too painful." "I should have known better," he insisted, "after everything you and Dad did for us." "You know now," I said simply. "That's what matters." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I stood in my garden, pruning the rose bushes Richard had planted decades ago. Next door, I could hear the sounds of renovation as David and Tyler prepared their new home. They'd moved in just a month earlier, and already the rhythm of our lives had found a new pattern. Morning coffee with David before he left for work, helping Tyler with his college applications in the evenings. Sunday dinners together in my dining room. Caroline had moved to Chicago for a fresh start. She called Tyler weekly now, their relationship tentatively healing with each conversation. She never called me, and I didn't expect her to. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. But she was making an effort with her son, and for that, I was grateful. As I gathered the fallen leaves into a pile, I heard Tyler call out from over the fence, "Grandma, I got in! Boston University! Early decision!" I rushed to the fence, garden shears still in hand. "Oh, Tyler, that's wonderful!" His face was alight with joy. "Dad's on his way home early. Can we celebrate at your place tonight?" "Of course," I said, my heart full. "I'll make your favorite lasagna." That evening, as we toasted Tyler's success with sparkling cider in Richard's old crystal glasses, I looked around my dining room table. My family was smaller now, reshaped by pain and truce, but perhaps stronger for it. David caught my eye and raised his glass slightly. "To Mom," he said, "who didn't ruin our lives after all but helped us rebuild them." Tyler raised his glass too. "To Grandma and to second chances." I thought of Richard then, how proud he would be of his son and grandson. How he would have weathered this storm alongside us, steady and true. I raised my own glass. "To family," I said, "the ones who see us clearly even when we can't see ourselves." Later, after they'd gone home next door, I sat alone in my living room with a cup of tea. The house was quiet, but not empty. Not anymore. Through my window, I could see the lights on in their house, David moving past the kitchen window, Tyler's silhouette in his upstairs bedroom. I had spent so many years trying to be the perfect mother-in-law, unobtrusive, supportive, never overstepping. I had swallowed my concerns when I saw warning signs in Caroline's behavior. I had maintained a polite distance when every instinct told me to intervene. I had tried so hard not to be the meddling mother-in-law of sitcom cliches that I had almost lost what mattered most. Sometimes love means stepping back, and sometimes it means standing firm. I hadn't ruined their lives by being too present in them, if anything. I had been too absent when they needed me most. In the end, It wasn't me who revealed Caroline's betrayal. It was her own actions, uncovered by the sun she had tried to turn against me. There was a certain poetic justice in that, though not one I would have wished for. No victory comes without cost in family matters. As I prepared for bed, I glanced at the photograph of Richard on my nightstand. "We did our best," I whispered to him. And somehow, it was enough. In the morning, I would wake to a new day in this unexpected chapter of my life. A 65-year-old widow with her son and grandson living next door. All of us healing together from wounds we hadn't seen coming. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and pain. But there would also be Sunday dinners and morning coffees, college visits and everyday joys. Caroline had been right about one thing. I had influenced their lives. Just not in the way she claimed. Not by ruining, but by remaining. Not by interfering, but by enduring. In the end, love had been both the question and the answer. I turned out the light and closed my eyes, listening to the familiar creaks of the house Richard and I had shared for 40 years. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. We would face it together, my little family, remade by truth and strengthened by forgiveness. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left